So this month is the 6th year anniversary of the famous or infamous Why I Left the Left video that I did for PragerU. You may remember, it might be hard for you to remember, but you might remember that I once was a good lefty. I was a liberal, I was a Democrat, all of those nice things. And then things started to change. There were a couple things that led me to do a video with PragerU. One of them, of course, was that it seemed to me that my side, the left, was actually the ones that were acting completely illiberally. We were the ones who were silencing free speech on campus and shouting down speakers. We were focused on the collective instead of the individual. We were silencing voices we didn't like with false cries of racism and homophobia. And then, of course, more than anything else, there was the election of Donald Trump, which caused pretty much everyone I know to go completely insane. That was the backdrop to releasing this first video of 4 that I did for PragerU, Why I Left the Left. Do you believe in free speech? Do you believe that people should be judged by their character, not their skin color? Do you believe in freedom of religion? If you believe these things, you're probably not a progressive. You might think you're a progressive. I used to think I was. My show, The Rubin Report, was originally part of the Progressive Young Turks network. Progressives struck me as liberals, but louder. Progressives were the nice guys. They looked out for the little guy. They cared about women and minorities. They embraced change. In short, who wouldn't want to be a progressive? But over the last couple of years, the meaning of the word progressive has changed. Progressives used to say, I may disagree with what you say, but I'll fight to the death for your right to say it. Not anymore. Banning speakers whose opinions you don't agree with from college campuses, that's not progressive. Prohibiting any words not approved of as politically correct, that's not progressive. Putting trigger warnings on books, movies, music, anything that might offend people, that's not progressive either. All of this has led me to believe that much of the left is no longer progressive, but regressive. This is one of the reasons I've spent so much time on my show talking about the regressive left. This regressive ideology doesn't judge people as individuals, but as a collective. If you're black or female or Muslim or Hispanic or member of any other minority group, you're judged differently than the most evil of all things, a white Christian male. The regressive left ranks minority groups in a pecking order to compete in a kind of oppression Olympics. Gold medal goes to the most offended. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream that his children would be judged by their character and not their skin color was a liberal idea, but these days it's not a progressive ideal. And what about religious freedom, the idea that no one else can tell you what you have to believe? Surely progressives still support that basic right. Well, not so much. I'm a married gay man, so you might think that I appreciate the government forcing a Christian baker or photographer or florist to act against their religion in order to cater, photograph, or decorate my wedding. But you'd be wrong. A government that can force Christians to violate their conscience can force me to violate mine. If a baker won't bake you a cake, find another baker. Don't demand that the state tell him what to do with his private business. I'm pro-choice, but a government that can force a group of Catholic nuns, literally called the Little Sisters of the Poor, to violate their faith and pay for abortion-inducing birth control can force anyone to do anything. That's not progressive, that's regressive. Today's progressivism has become a faux moral movement hurling charges of racism, bigotry, xenophobia, homophobia, Islamophobia, and a slew of other meaningless buzzwords at anyone they disagree with. The battle of ideas has been replaced by a battle of feelings, and outrage has replaced honesty. Diversity reigns supreme as long as it's not that pesky diversity of thought. This isn't the recipe for a free society, it's a recipe for authoritarianism. For these reasons, I can no longer call myself a progressive. I don't really call myself a Democrat either. I'm a classical liberal, a free thinker, and as much as I don't like to admit it, defending my liberal values has suddenly become a conservative position. So if you think people should be able to say what they think without being punished for it, that people should be judged by their behavior, not their skin color, and that people should be able to live the way that they want to live without government interference, then there's not much left on the left for you. I'll keep trying to explain that to progressives until I'm totally left out. I'm Dave Rubin of the Rubin Report for Prager University. So after that video blew up and my career blew up, pretty much Western civilization blew up as well. 17 months later, I did my second video for PragerU, which was entitled, So You Think You're Tolerant. You may remember this was around the time that the tactics of the left of silencing people and using these false accusations of racism and homophobia and bigotry not only were then being used against conservatives, but started to be being used against old school liberals themselves, guys like Jordan Peterson at the University of Toronto. You may remember an infamous moment when Maxine Waters, a Democrat, was out there telling people to get in the face of people she didn't like. There was Candace Owens, who, believe it or not, was a leftist at the time, and she was hounded out of a restaurant in Philadelphia. And then, the time that little old me went to University of New Hampshire and they had to take our event outside of the university because they couldn't secure it because I'm so crazy, and I got hounded down and screamed at and things thrown at me and noisemakers and the rest of it. So no, the people who purport to be tolerant often are not the tolerant ones. Tolerance. It's a word we hear a lot these days, so let's define it. Tolerance is the ability to live with people whose opinions and behavior you don't agree with. That's essentially how Oxford defines it, how Merriam-Webster defines it, and how we as a society have always defined it. You might be for the death penalty and your cousin might be against it. You might be against a $15 minimum wage and your coworker might be for it. Your dad might have voted for Trump, your mom might have voted for Clinton, and your brother may not have voted at all. Whatever differences we have, tolerating others' opinions is a prerequisite to a functioning and free society. America itself was built on a foundation of tolerance. The Declaration of Independence guarantees us life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But there's an implicit contract there. To have your life, your liberty, and your pursuit of happiness, you have to be tolerant of somebody else's life, their liberty, and their pursuit of happiness. This contract, though, seems to be breaking down. If you listen to the mainstream media, only one side is living up to this deal, the left. The right, according to the media, is intolerant of everyone, except those darned white heterosexual Christian males. There's only one problem. It's just not true. Incredibly, the left isn't even tolerant of the very people they say they're tolerant of. If you're gay or black or an immigrant and you're not in lockstep with current leftist orthodoxy, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you believe we should judge people on the content of their character and not the color of their skin, the left calls you racist. If you believe that America is a nation of immigrants, but that our country should also protect its borders, the left calls you a xenophobe. If you believe that men and women are equal but fundamentally different, the left calls you sexist. Here's the thing, those who only tolerate people they agree with or like aren't actually tolerant. So who is tolerant? Is it the organizers of the Women's March who had to apologize for the hurt and confusion they caused when they invited a man, leftist icon Bernie Sanders, to speak at their convention? Is it the Antifa thugs who caused UC Berkeley to spend $600,000 on security when mainstream conservative Ben Shapiro showed up to give a talk? Or is it Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters who scolded Kanye West for talking out of turn when he dared suggest that blacks should think for themselves? These aren't isolated examples. I'm guessing that you, person watching this right now, have silenced yourself because you don't want to suffer the wrath of the outrage mob. So let me ask the question again. Who is tolerant? Well, here's the surprise. It's actually those scary right-wingers that the media and the universities demonize every day. I speak from personal experience. Maybe I'm a glutton for punishment here, but I still consider myself a liberal. And it's my duty as a liberal to say what I think. I would rather stand for what I believe and be hated than bow down and be loved. The left, sadly, has become utterly intolerant of anyone with whom they disagree. Why? because they believe that they know how you should live and how you should think. Any deviation, any nonconformity is dangerous to that goal. Believe it or not, the right these days actually welcomes diversity of thought. I can tell you that in the last few years of my political evolution, I've consistently found conservatives to be tolerant and open-minded. Don't take my word for it, though. Test it out for yourself. Go talk to some. They do exist, and they do things like watch movies, travel, and eat ethnic food. You know, regular people things. You know what I found out? The right, much more than the left, believes in the notion of live and let live. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the true definition of tolerance. I'm Dave Rubin of the Rubin Report for Prager University. 21 months later, I did my third video for PragerU, The Bravery Deficit. At this point, wokeness had completely burst forth into mainstream culture. Cancel culture was here. People were being fired left and right. And then, of course, it got a little rocket fuel, which was COVID-19. We had lockdowns, we had mandates, we had people not being allowed to go to grandma's funeral and not being allowed to go to school and much, much more. And I felt the one thing that was going to stop it was you standing up for yourself. Do you watch Fox News with your finger on the back button in case someone enters the room? Do you methodically clear your browser history to erase all evidence of PragerU videos? Do you hide your subscription to the Ben Shapiro podcast? Or, and perhaps most dangerous of all, are you afraid of getting caught watching the Rubin Report, which is hosted by the very scary but quite dapper Dave Rubin? If the answer to any of these questions is yes, then you're in the political closet and it's time to come out. Here's the good news. If you currently reside in the United States of America, you live in the freest country in the history of the world. Beyond some basic limitations, you can do whatever you want and, with hard work, become whatever it is you want to be. Pretty great, ain't it? So why the long face? Because you know that something is out of whack. You really don't feel free to say what you want, or share your true thoughts on Facebook, or even associate with those you'd like to. And why is that? I'll tell you why. Because there's a mass affliction spreading throughout the Western world. It's called the Bravery Deficit. People, good people like you, are afraid to say what they think. And there's little wonder. Believe that men can't give birth? Congrats, you're a transphobe. Want people to keep more of what they earn because they know how to spend it better than the government does? Bravo, you're a greedy capitalist. Understand that the gender pay gap is because men and women often choose different professions and different hours, not because of rampant sexism? Hooray, you're a misogynist. Take the wrong side of any hot-button issue and your reputation, your friends, and your job can all be lost in an instant. You will likely never get a chance to confront your accusers, most of whom are anonymous. And you may feel forced to issue a faux apology to save yourself, which, by the way, it usually won't. The understandable temptation is to think that this politically correct madness will soon end, just die out on its own. Well, it won't. Activists and their mainstream media allies like the New York Times and CNN, propaganda outlets like Media Matters and the Southern Poverty Law Center, and your local university will make sure of that. Big tech with its control of search algorithms, its shadow banning and deboosting are also in on the game. If you're one of the people who believes that if you just remain quiet, that things will get better, well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you're a frog in a slowly boiling pot. And it doesn't end well for the frog. So what can you do? Believe it or not, the solution is not that hard. Step 1, think for yourself. Step 2, say it out loud. Just because a former bartender says the world is going to end in 12 years because of climate change doesn't mean it's true. Doomsdayers have been saying the same thing for decades, and we're still here. Just because a filmmaker says we should model our healthcare system on Cuba's doesn't mean it's a good idea. Would you rather have heart surgery in Houston or in Havana? And just because a career politician is a millionaire with 3 houses who rails against the rich doesn't make him a hypocrite. Oh wait, in that case it actually does. The point is, perhaps your most important job as a human being is to stand up for the things you believe in. Don't take the path of least resistance. Be better than those who would silence you, deplatform you, and mob you. How? Just stop being afraid. The mob depends on the fact that everyone is scared to say what they think. don't give them that power. All of the successes of America and the Western values that gave birth to America are being eroded as we speak. We can't just blame Hollywood, the media, and the political establishment any longer. It's time to look in the mirror. Think of the bravery of your grandparents and your ancestors before them who undoubtedly had it far worse than you do today. If they were brave, then you can be brave too. It's time to come out of the closet, the political one. You are the solution to the bravery deficit. So what are you waiting for? I'm Dave Rubin, author of Don't Burn This Book, Thinking for Yourself in an Age of Unreason, for Prager University. A full 2 years later, I did my fourth and most recent video for PragerU, 3 Ways to Fix America. At this point, COVID was somehow still here. I guess maybe enough of us weren't brave. The vaccine mandates were here. We had our summer of love, which actually was a summer of violence. We had BLM, we had Antifa, we watched cities burn, we watched the media gaslight all of us. And what I realized more than anything was maybe rather than figuring out a new mousetrap, we had to go back to some time-tested ideals. Something ain't right, and we all know it. Are we just going to give up on the greatest country in the history of the world? Or are we going to fight for freedom and a thriving future? They always tell us that we're at a once-in-a-lifetime pivotal moment. But this time, they're actually right. You know it, I know it, you know that I know it, I know that you know it, and they know we all know it. So what are we going to do about it? Well, I've got a few ideas. First off, be an individualist. The American Heritage Dictionary defines an individualist as one that asserts individuality by independence of thought and action. If that sounds self-centered, it is. But why is that bad? Everything in your life starts with you, your attitude, how you project yourself to the world, whether you take responsibility for your own actions. The founders of America sought to create a government whose primary purpose was to protect the freedom of the individual. After that, as far as George, Ben, and Tom were concerned, you were on your own. Nobody saw this more clearly than the 19th century French writer Alexis de Tocqueville. He came to America to see what all the commotion was about and was absolutely blown away. This new American democracy, what he called the equality of conditions, was not merely a new way to govern, he realized, but a new way to live. For de Tocqueville, American individualism was not about being self-centered, but about being self-reliant. Government can't guarantee your happiness, but it should guarantee your right to pursue it. This is the only way to make progress on a national level and still be authentically inclusive. Because where true freedom exists, there will be individualism. And where individualism exists, there will be true freedom. But being an individualist is just the start. You must also be a family. There are lots of ways to measure the strength of a society, but family has to be at the top of the list. This hit me very deeply one night during Jordan Peterson's worldwide lecture tour in 2019, which I hosted. Jordan and I were leaving the theater after our show in Dublin, Ireland. 2 men ran towards us. Wiping tears from their eyes, they told us their story. They were a father and son. Several years before, they had a huge falling out. On their own personal timelines, they had both bought Jordan's book, 12 Rules for Life, and began fixing up their lives. Separately, they had attended the show. As thousands of people exited the theater, they saw each other in the crowd, and right then and there, after so much time and so much heartache, they embraced and made amends. The family bond was restored. So how important is family? According to a 2019 American Enterprise Institute survey, which asked participants to rank attributes of the American dream, a good family life ranked number 2, right behind freedom of choice. It's no surprise. It's within the nurturing bonds of family we learn to deal with the world. Once you have your head screwed on straight and you've made things right with your family, then you're ready to move on to the next level of real social improvement. Be a community. There are all kinds of communities. It's your church or your synagogue. It's your neighbors. It's the girls you meet for brunch or the guys you play basketball with. It's the group of people that know you and care about you, and you care about them. Next to breathing and maybe a couple other things, I don't know what's more essential than that. When George Bailey's brother toasts George at the end of the classic movie It's a Wonderful Life to the richest man in town, we know exactly what he's talking about. George's community. Are you catching the theme here? When individuals are healthier, the family is healthier, and in turn, so is society. It's obvious. We know it. Which is why those on the left oppose all of it, every piece. They despise the free-thinking individual, they denigrate the family, and they have no true understanding of community. For the left, your identity group, your skin color, your sexual preference, determines who you are and how you think. Defy this identity at your peril. If you're black and you're conservative, well, as one elderly gentleman put it, you ain't black. Before they scrubbed it from their website, Black Lives Matter bragged that they were all about deconstructing the nuclear family. You know, mom, dad, and the kids. As for community, it's too independent and too traditional. The left demands that you be part of the collective, a hive mind where everyone thinks the same. Anyone outside the hive mind must be shouted down, harassed, or canceled. Is that the world you want to be part of? How about this instead? Be an individualist. Be a member of a family. Be part of a community. You know what that sounds like to me? America. I'm Dave Rubin, author of Don't Burn This Country for Prager University. So I think you guys can see pretty well how my political evolution was laid out in the course of 6 years over 4 5-minute videos. But for me, it wasn't just about learning new ideas and being unafraid to talk about them. It was also talking to people that I thought were my ideological enemies, whether they were Dennis Prager or Glenn Beck or Larry Elder or Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro, or the list goes on. I was willing to talk to people, hear what they had to say, and then compare that to my own thoughts. I think everything that I've spent the last couple of years talking about is exactly what is needed in America right now. It's imperfect, I'm imperfect, you're imperfect, but if we fight for those ideals, and if we act a little bit more bravely, and we turn back to some of those founding documents that sometimes seem old and irrelevant, I really think we can fix this thing. I look forward to my 5th and hopeful final PragerU video being something like, okay, you did it, let's move on. That would be pretty sweet. But if you've been on this adventure with me, I appreciate it, and I hope you'll share this with some friends and get them on board this little train that we call freedom. I'm Dave Rubin of the Rubin Report, stealing these short videos from PragerU to shoot this film. Whatever.